So we must do two things, two great things together to encompass that enormous new view that lies before us, but to encompass it within the framework of science, to see it within the whole categorical framework of science, and to see that these two are not separate, but that they are wedded. The bigness of the idea, the newness of the idea, the greatness of it is one with the structure of science, the structure of being itself. We see that we can interpret all of these phenomena insofar as we have an understanding of the seven and the four. As we culture, as so many of you have taken the work of last year and of the recent years, but especially that work on the days of creation, and have cultured it, don't think that this is something in isolation, or that it is a quiet task that is not having its effect. It is going on in consciousness. You are really touching the structure of being itself, the structure of how being becomes. And this is a great support to your universe, to your world, at every point in consciousness. And so we have felt that this was a fluctuation coming in. You remember our term fluctuation, that when we had that 911 experience, it was a fluctuation coming in that we will see is so big and so momentous that we will not be able to smooth it out. The world tried to smooth it out. America tried. We had those months following the event, those first months where everyone tried to smooth it out, and they would come on and they would say on the news or on the various talk shows and so forth, well, you know, we have to get back to business as usual, and we're going to get back to normal. Don't worry now. And but you know that how many people had psychologically related problems with it, things that looked negative, but are really all signs of this change going on. And in spite of the belief that we could return and that nothing was changed, so many said, you remember, nothing has changed. America hasn't changed. Well, this is true, and it's not true. You have a deep structure identity of something, and this never changes. But at the surface structure, where there needs to be an evolving to the fulfillment of that identity, the complete carrying out of that identity and its full manifestation and establishment, then you do have change, and it's right to have it. So really, that issue could not be smoothed out, and we could not return to things as they were, because that is the nature of progress, and we cannot return to positions that are outgrown. Isn't that wonderful? We've outgrown what was before, what came up to that point, what came up to this point, this very moment. You see that there will not be any going back in the un-cybernetic sense, but only in the true cybernetic sense. So love's idea is is filled with promise. You feel the promise that is built into our evolution, and it is not filled with doom or with gloom or with the fear of annihilation. The idea will not be annihilated. And the Christ leaves no one untouched in this, on this way, on this universal way. We can't say, for instance, well, you know, that's somebody else's problem, and now I just relate to you those various standpoints which the human mind would take in respect to the whole presentation of this problem, quote unquote. And these various standpoints have one thing in common. They have to do with our participation. How do we participate? So love is that which makes everyone a participator. Isn't that something? Love, if we don't want to participate, love will force us to accept what best promotes our growth. And love's purpose, love's design is to make everyone a partaker. Do you know that? So what we are talking about now are questions that involve participation, of how we participate and how we don't participate. Do we participate? Do we take part? Do we take part in our relationships, in our careers, in our interactions with others, or is there a tendency to isolate oneself and to do elsewise than to be involved in a healthy way, in a scientific way, with what is going on? So we can't say that this is somebody else's problem. It is our problem. It is the problem of each one. And so these various tacks on participating are all to do with the Christ and with the Christ translation. We'll see in which way as we first talk about them each in a definite way, and then we will see what is going on, how is this really involved with the Christ translation and the workings of the Christ translation. So you would see that really there is a first tendency, or there is a tendency in us first to be apathetic. I shouldn't say first, but let me just give us point one, that in regard to the question of participating, is my attitude active or is there an apathy, you see? So one sees, you know, I didn't just make this up, one saw it, that in many cases there was an apathy to what was going on, an indifference, That's that indifference that comes in and says it doesn't affect me, it's somebody else's problem. I'm not interested in that. I'm not going to go along with that. You see, I'm not going to play that game, thinking that if we don't take it up as an issue, that we are really a good Christian Scientist to ignore it. that I don't want to hear it, I don't want to see it, so one shuts it off every time it comes up. It's count me out. And you have that kind of detached, that detached sense of the problem. It's very much the Adam sleep. It's Adam sleeps. The Adam dreaming, wanting to continue to sleep, to pretend it doesn't exist, saying, don't disturb me with that, don't bother me with that. I'm asleep in the cradle of infancy. And then you have another reaction, you have another attitude in respect to participating. And that is an even more a sense of pretending that it doesn't exist, that there is no problem. You see, there's only good going on. These kinds of attitudes one has seen in Christian Scientists or within oneself in early days when we didn't understand that our world, our universe is Christian Science, that we felt that there was a separation from the world, that there should be a separation from the world, and so whenever anything came up of a worldly nature or of a problematic nature, that we said it doesn't exist. And many Christian Scientists would just turn their back on what was going on. And so we would say there is only good going on, but that would be a state of belief and not of understanding. Can you see it is true, there is only good going on, but this is a statement of belief if we don't participate rightly with that good that is going on. Is that true? Huh? So we see really two forms of resistance. These are actually forms of resistance. The apathy, the indifference to what is going on, and the pretending that it doesn't exist, that there is no problem. And then we have a third attitude, and here again we see a resistance. It is the Christ, of course, which must deal with all resistance, which therefore will have to break down and will break down these different resistances. In the third, what do we have? We have that very active sense of resistance, of rebelling against the problem. So it is that very willful and obvious, evident, open resistance. It's the Jonah. It's very much Jonah. You know, Jonah being the pith of the Christ matrix, huh? How he's at the point of the Christ as the Christ, and has all to do with the kind of a core resistance within the human consciousness that says nothing doing. I'm not going to go along with it. I'm rebelling against it. I'm not going there. And so you get a stubbornness, a stubborn will, digging the heels in. It says, that's not my problem. Not my problem. That's exactly what Jonah said about Nineveh, huh? Not my problem. God wanted to send him there. He said, no, not me. You send somebody else. I have my own agenda. And he had his own agenda and got in the boat and went in the opposite direction to Nineveh. And we know what happened to that boat and the various experiences that he encountered that began to break down the resistance within him. He had actually already decided, he had sized up the problem, he had determined that Nineveh was not worth saving. And of course, when God told him that Nineveh had reformed and that they were on the way, and he was even sorry to hear that Nineveh had improved. Doesn't that sound familiar? And so it is with us that we're sometimes almost sorry that things get better because it might prove us wrong in the end. So it's fighting it all the way, and within and without, and trying to run away from facing the situation, really facing God. And it has a great deal to do with being self-involved. Jonah was self-involved, and I'm sorry to tell you that we are very much self-involved, and we have our own interests, we have our own problems. Don't bother me with the world's problems. I have my own, and I'm very busy with those problems. And it has a lot to do with holding on, wanting to hold on to the old standpoint. So 1, 2, and 3, you see, are no participation. We do not want to participate at all. So these are forms of resistance. And then we have a fourth standpoint. And the fourth is also a form of resistance, but it is not having to do with non-participation, but with over-participation. So what is this fourth one, this over-participation or false participation, actually where we become an active part of the problem, is very subtle, and it's something that we see over and over again. It is that wherein we try to over-participate by trying to do good and to be good. We overemphasize the attempts to do something, we want to be an active part of the solution, and yet we become an active part of the problem. We put really our own sense of good in the way of the workings of the Christ. And so it's there that you have the human morality coming in. Human morality, which is, let's put our Christ translation up, because, so we have we call them, of course, the two translations. This is just something that we are all familiar with as terminology, but it's actually one translation that is going on, the Christ translation, which has two aspects to it, the translation of immortal mind and the translation of mortal mind, right? Scientific translation of immortal mind, which we, for convention, call the first translation, and the scientific translation of mortal mind, for a convention, we call the second translation. Now, these two aspects cannot be separated. They cannot be divided from each other. We cannot say, well, I know that the divine mind, the immortal mind, is translating itself. I don't have to be concerned with that. But I am very much concerned with the second translation. I'm concerned with the scientific translation of mortal mind, which shows me a retranslation, doesn't it? It shows me a retranslation through 3 degrees that we are presented with. The first degree of depravity, and then with the second degree, let me get the terminology right, is evil beliefs disappearing, and then the third degree, which is on understanding. So we want to take part, we want to see this going on, this retranslation. And actually what we see there is something very practical, very well known to us, that the first degree is in a way like the problem to us, huh? So what happens when we try to over-participate? We said, well, what happens is that one involves oneself in the problem and begins to say, what can I do about it? What's the solution to the problem, huh? So the first and second degrees of the second translation lose their scientific context, you see. The moment I take a wrong approach to participating. Because what happens is I start with the problem. I see the problem, and then I say, what am I going to do about it? You see, first of all, we see the problem. We are stimulated by the problem. Every one of us with that 911 was, in a way, being bombarded with that every moment, every hour, every day, 24/7, every channel, every moment that you could turn on any form of the media, that problem was there. We were stimulated by that problem. There was a digging into every nook, every cranny of the phenomenon, digging into the human situation, into the mortal situation, analyzing the problem endlessly. Huh? And so one is caught up in that. Says, yes, this is the problem, and I want to do something about it. I want to take part in it, in solving it. And we are caught up in that problem, and we say, what am I going to do about it? And what we try to do about it is to move everything higher. We say, I have to move everything higher, namely to the second degree. And so you get a sense of working in the way of thoughts tending spiritually upward. Huh? How can we improve the material condition? Let's improve the material condition. Let's try to be good. Let's try to do good. And so we over-participate. One saw this. In the beginning, there was that, just that beautiful, natural response to the breaking in of the Christ idea, that everyone did what the impulsion of that breakthrough was calling forth in one, without thinking about it, without analyzing it. But you see, the moment one begins to analyze the problem, then the human mind goes to work, huh? Yeah, the human mind goes to work. Why? You see that the problem has been taken out of its context, out of the context of the two translations, because those translations don't start with analyzing the problem, do they? The Christ translation does not start with analyzing the problem. What does it start with? What? It starts with what? Up here? With what? With God, huh? With God. Right? Yes. With God, with principle, and comes out from principle. And that term principle is standing for the whole of the word order, the whole nature of God. The whole operation of God is included in, is embedded in that term principle. If we start with the problem, you see that we have taken the problem out of the context of its field of solution. Out of the field of the solution. And this is where the false sense of participation comes in. So, and then one began to see that that sense of human goodness began to capitulate. You had each one, when you have each one trying to be good, you get everyone's personal sense of what good is. You get each one's human interpretation of what is good. And so you had different standpoints of what was good, and they were counter to each other. And so one saw the old coming back in, the old standpoint of having really, don't want to say lost that idea that broke in, but it wasn't maintained in its purity, in its beauty as it was breaking in. But this is what we have to go through. This is what the human mind has to go through, that it must learn the lesson that says you need a larger context, you need a bigger framework within which to solve your problem. You need to understand that there's something above and beyond your human sense of good. And this is the Christ idea. And so the whole thing has within itself a feedback loop which guarantees the success of it. It guarantees the success that anything that is not lined up with the true sense of good, which is what the Christ always brings out, that is so much to do. Would somebody be able to tell me why good has to do with the Christ? Good is the quality of God, huh? Good is the way God expresses himself. And what is it that is responsible for the expression of God? That Christ. Yes. You see how simple that is? How simple that is. So the Christ, as you know from your working with that wonderful pamphlet, The Christ Idea by Max Kapler, as our preparation, you know that there were one or two very pointed areas in that pamphlet that had to do with good and evil, with what the Christ has to do with good, and how the Christ will always bring out good, but that it is not the human sense of good. It will not necessarily coincide with what the human considers to be good. This is clear because the human context of evaluating and interpreting is too small. It must be enlarged to the divine, to the spiritual. So the Christ works on that. It says, I'm enlarging and enlarging your framework, and I have to do that. I can do that by showing you what doesn't work, what fails again. So the success is that human goodness always fails. Human goodness always fails. Divine goodness forever succeeds. This is what you see with Cain and Abel, that Cain always kills Abel. It's the second degree capitulating before the first degree when we take the first and second degrees out of the context of the whole of the Christ translation. So that second degree never succeeds in and of itself to taking us to the third degree. Think of that. This is wonderful to know, isn't it? This is so wonderful to know. Then we're not always tripped up and feeling so downcast and disappointed because something didn't go the way we expected it to go, and we had such a high sense of right. Our intentions were so good. Our ideal. You see, we have our ideal of what is good. But this is the office of the Christ. The Christ truth is the ideal and sets the ideal. And this is the only thing that the Christ can bring to complete manifestation and full expression is the ideal of God, God's ideal, which is the truth of being. Anything short of that fails, and this is so successful that it fails. It shows us that something was wrong or is wrong with our start, you see, with our context. Love and the Christ want that context to be enlarged beyond the human. The human is a limited context. So it's as though to say, go back to your input, to your start, and enlarge that context, and you will see that you cannot begin with the problem. You can't begin with the problem. And so we have to start with God. Haven't we been taught that marvelously, beautifully over the years through the many, many summer schools that we have had with Max Kapler? I don't think there was a single one where we weren't admonished not to start with the problem, but to start with God. And here we see it in perhaps a different way, that it is the essential, the fundamental message of the Christ translation that we must begin with God, and that out of that beginning, out from God comes the translation, the translatability, that wonder of the Christ translation, that by beginning with the infinite principle, with an infinite principle, that because that principle is divine, it is coming to us, it is translating itself to us, to every point within the whole universe of consciousness, that Christ comes and knows how to specify itself, how to take the whole of truth the whole of that infinite one truth, and to individualize it. And to individualize it not only infinitely, but from that infinitude of individualization to specify it perfectly, to bring it to the exact point of meeting the need, and how to bring that idea, that Christ idea, that specific idea, to bring it forth in human consciousness, to manifest it within human consciousness until it is a full light of mind within our mind, that we have the mind of Christ, and that is the solution. That's the solution to the problem. And each one of us would entertain and would give birth to, in a sense it's a giving birth to a solution that is individual to the world problem. Wouldn't it? Huh? Because the Christ will come to your consciousness in a different way than it comes to my consciousness. So each one entertains the Christ idea in an absolutely individual way. It's so beautiful, and these solutions are complementary. They are all working together to bring out the one universal solution. So the Christ is asking us to participate in the universal problem. Participate in your universe. We are invited to do that. We are welcomed to do that. And depending upon how open we are to that invitation, or how closed we are to it, you see, what the degree of resistance is. If there's any degree of resistance to that, then we are forced to take part, to participate in the problem. And this is all love. It's love that welcomes us, that invites us, and that forces us to, what is that? Love forces us to accept, yes, what best promotes our growth. And, this really raises the question about opening up to the problem, and we've been speaking about the problem. What is the problem? What is the problem? Is it someone? Is it some group? Is it some renegade or a renegade group? Is it something called terrorism? Is that the problem? You see, the human mind would, in a way, personalize the problem, wants to pin it to a person. We have to pin the problem to principle. We have to, and I'll explain what I mean, but we try to pin it on a person, We say, who did this? Who or what made this happen? And then we go after, try to go after that one, that person, and what they represented. Who's to blame for this? Who's to blame for the problem? And what science shows us, what the Christ wants to show us, and what love is always showing us, is that there is only one problem, and it's the problem of being. Our problem is the problem of being. and it is showing itself forth always in a new way, always in a new way. You see that when we go to the deep structure, I think we perhaps began this morning saying that when we go to the deep structure, we find that all that we are dealing with is being, the structure of being itself. And so this is silencing. This is such a comfort, I think. And it silences that series of questions, a series of wrong or inappropriate questions that come up within the human heart and the human mind. Why did this happen to us? You know, why do they hate me? Why this? Why that? The moment you see, oh, well, the problem is the problem of being, isn't that somehow comforting? It's beautiful, you see. And the problem is universal, all right? The problem of being is universal. But that problem is not personal. It's not people. It's not places. It's not things. The problem, because it's a problem of being, in fact, is system intrinsic. It can be understood precisely through its system intrinsic place value. The place value of the problem within the whole structure of being. Is that what we were seeing, really? That the shift that is taking place today and every phenomenon that arises having to do with that shift is the shift from truth to love, from the 6th day of creation to the 7th day of creation, from the 6,000-year period to the 7th. And this is where the problem comes up, the world problem, what we perceive as a world problem. Everything that is coming up today is understandable through an understanding of that context. Isn't that terrific? It's tremendous, really. I can't tell you how precise that is and how comforting that is to know that nothing is out of control. Absolutely nothing is out of control. That the problem has to do with a system intrinsic place value at any given point in time, and we need only to go to the system to find that point of intersection and to look into the face of that point of intersection, so to say. Look into the face of God at that point, and look at that accentuation which is calling forth the problem to appear at the surface structure. And so again you see the value of culturing these 7 days of creation with their subtones. So the problem is universal, as we said, but the solution is individual, and that we must see more clearly now.